Please join me in welcoming Tony Blair to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aaron. Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to see people here. As a result of, obviously, still the COVID restrictions, it's a smaller group of people than we otherwise would have assembled, but thank you so much for coming. I'm really honored that you have, and Ara is one of the people I respect most in public life. He's a thinker who's also a practitioner, and a practitioner who's also a leader. It's a pretty rare combination. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have your introduction. And thank you, Ara, for the kind welcome. And thank you also to the Institute of Global Health Innovation for hosting today's event. I can't think of any better place to speak with you about the future of Britain, and an institution like Imperial College, which is a tremendous global leader in science, engineering, medicine, and business. The achievements of Imperial researchers are enormous, and are not just reserved for the 14 Nobel Prize winners, from the discovery of penicillin to the development of holography, to the invention of fiber optics, and to groundbreaking engineering projects like the Maglev Railway. And of course, Imperial has played an important role in the response to the COVID pandemic, most notably the REACT study, led by Ara and a talented team here at Imperial. The REACT program has become one of the world's biggest studies of community COVID, the testing of it particularly, and has been instrumental in tracking the progress of the epidemic here in this country. But I know also that this study has been of invaluable and great help as a source of data for policymakers all over the world, and we should be immensely grateful to them. So, to turn to the speech, which is the future of Britain in an era of what I've called the three revolutions. And I start by saying there's a gaping hole in the governing of Britain where new ideas should be. We're living through three revolutionary changes simultaneously and are ill-prepared for any of them. Each of them would require major changes in the way we work as a nation. All of them together pose a challenge which is unprecedented in recent history. The changes are Brexit, the technology revolution, and a climate ambition which foresees a unique transition to being carbon neutral in the power sector in just over a decade, and the whole country in 25 years. COVID-19 has in some senses masked the scale of the challenge because it has been its own extraordinary crisis. But as it recedes, or at least becomes managed, the following will become starkly clear. By end 2022, we were the highest tax burden and the largest spending by the state since the post-war period. Our debt will be higher than at any time in the last half century, and our sustainable growth rates in the next years will be around 1.7%, nowhere near those of the first part of this century, and woefully inadequate to pay for the services we expect. For the average household, taxes will rise by around £370 per year, energy prices by £600. They will be asked to swap gas boilers for heat pumps and their conventional fuel cars for electric vehicles. The costs of basic foodstuffs are going up, and general inflation will cause rises in interest rates. Business will see the biggest shift and uplift in corporation tax since the 1970s, whilst investment is 12% below pre-Brexit amounts. Our productivity levels, the real test of an economy's strength and the key to real wage rises, are stagnating. Now, we retain significant strengths. Our universities, our leading-edge technology, particularly in areas like the life sciences, which post-COVID is a huge asset, and now in climate technologies, like renewables. We've got the City of London as a global financial centre still. Creative industries, our language, our culture, historic and present connectivity to so much of the world. There is no cause, therefore, for pessimism, but there is an urgent need for realism in the face of these revolutions. Without a radical shift in policy, we face a steady, inexorable compound decline similar to the 1960s and 1970s. It could be several years before we realize this, but with our present course, we're relegating ourselves to a league which is poorer, less prosperous, and less powerful. I hesitate when I hear the government slogan, levelling up. Other than a desire to give opportunity to those without it, which obviously is hard to disagree with, the slogan risks misdirecting the framing of the country's problem. We face a national challenge, all of the country, not simply the areas left behind. So to the revolutions. Brexit is a word most of us want to forget. Understandably, it was a deeply divisive period. It was a divided time, and indeed it's done. The debate about its wisdom is over. But it was a decision of consequence, and the consequence we cannot ignore, however much we may want to. According to the government's forecast on current policy, we will suffer a long-term 4% drop in GDP. The preparations as a result of exiting the single market have cost the government directly over £4 billion and probably much, much more to the private sector. Brexit uncertainty is one of the top 3 concerns of 40% of British business. And leave aside Northern Ireland, we don't yet have deals on the city, financial services, or any part of the services sector. There are tariff borders on industrial goods, and we face a situation where we're shut out of Europe when Europe is taking decisions across a range of issues which deeply affect us. We can alter our political and legal relationship with Europe, but we cannot change our interests or our geography. The government doesn't have a post-Brexit regulatory strategy, and it is letting passive divergence from the EU exacerbate costs for businesses for no purpose, deepening an already substantial economic hit from Brexit itself. We need to decide what our new trade relations with Europe should be, where we can easily align with European regulation and where, practically, we want to depart from it, and have a whole area where we're intending to deepen our European relationship for the future in areas like defense, energy, and the environment. Above all, we need to make our economy highly competitive, attract world-class talent, and make our independence from the EU a platform for economic growth. But it needs a plan into which hard work and thought has gone, policy detail, strategic analysis, and at present there isn't one. The technology revolution is the most important and most impactful of the three revolutions. But talk to many policymakers about tech, and to be fair, this is not a purely British phenomenon, and they're much more comfortable talking about regulating Facebook than setting out the opportunities, for example, of education technology to change the way we teach and learn, or how the National Health Service should be completely rethought in how it's structured and paid for. Yet over the coming decade, this revolution will disrupt virtually every part of our lives, including our working lives. Advances in artificial intelligence will be dramatic. Whole sectors of the economy, both services and manufacturing, will feel the impact. As many as 9 million jobs could be automated, though of course new jobs will also be created. It's a revolution in the labour market. Here the government does have a plan of sorts, but measure the government's plan against the scale of the change, and it is immediately apparent how short it is from what is necessary. Net zero by 2050. It's the right commitment with interim stretching targets in power, transport, and construction for 2035. But just think of what these correct but vastly ambitious climate commitments mean. In little over 10 years, we will have to double electricity supply, replace the present heating systems in 10 million homes, turn 20 million fossil fuel cars into scrap and replace them with electric vehicles, and create renewables at 4 times the present rate. And all whilst losing the revenue which comes from fuel duty, which will amount to an annual shortfall of some £20 billion by 2035. There is absolutely no way this can be done without, amongst other things, major changes in planning laws, investment in new nuclear capacity, using gas as a transitional fuel, reform of electricity markets, and a credible strategy for switching our homes to low-carbon heating. But show me the plan to do this. The point is, these triple revolutions necessitate a vast reordering of government's priorities, its policies, its personnel, how it's structured. It requires a level of coherence so that, for example, what we do on taxation does not cut across what we do to stay competitive. What we want to do on local devolution doesn't run counter to what we must do on planning law. And it needs our political debate to change radically. The paradox of 21st century politics is at the very time when 20th century ideology of left versus right has never been less relevant, our main political parties became bedeviled by it. The Conservative Party deserted their traditional role as high priests of pragmatic change and turned Thatcherism into a cult. The Labour Party went through the catastrophe of the Corbyn era, from which, under Keir Starmer's determined leadership, it is thankfully emerging with renewed vigour, a talented front bench, as Rachel Reeves shows again today, and her speech underlines, and the Labour Party has recovered a healthy desire to erase the memory of 4 successive defeats. It could provide the plan the country needs. As Keir himself acknowledges, this is indeed the Labour Party challenge for 2022. However, for years, policy for both parties, in the sense of a relentless search for the right answer, which, as I discovered in government, is ultimately all that matters, that was abandoned. Politics became all about politics, not about ideas. I understand completely the rage against what happened in Downing Street during lockdown and how the country feels. And maybe Boris Johnson goes and maybe he doesn't. But the real problem for Britain is the absence of a government plan for Britain's future. The NHS will soon eat up over 40% of day-to-day spending on public services. At least when we put health spending up to the European average in the early years of this century, we accompanied it by far-reaching reforms, which took NHS satisfaction levels to the highest they'd ever been. But today, though the staff continue to perform miracles, the service, especially post-COVID, is too often unacceptably poor. There are those within the NHS leading the way on reform, using technology to transform the service, thinking imaginatively about the future. We need to empower them. Through advances in medical science, the use of data, making systems properly interoperable, and artificial intelligence, we can transform the patient experience and reduce cost. And Lord Darzai himself has estimated that the NHS could save £12.5 billion by use of AI in eliminating routine and administrative tasks alone. But all of this requires organizing together with major workforce reform. The point is, we can't go on as we are, even in an area as politically delicate as the NHS. And you could make this case across the whole of public policy. We need to apply technology to areas like crime and immigration, where the only sensible way of preventing illegal immigration is a system of digital identity. We need to shift tax from labor and capital, especially post-Brexit, find other sources of revenue so that our tax system is not colliding with our competitiveness, and to rethink pensions for the next generation, where apart from the burgeoning cost, the circumstances of retirement will be completely different in the next generation from today. Fuel duty will probably have to be replaced by some form of road pricing. And the point is, this list is not exhaustive, but not a single thing we need to do to turn our fortunes around will come without political pain. And our politics show few, if any, signs of preparedness to tolerate that pain. Just remember the Thatcher economic reforms caused huge public discontent. At times, by the way, the Tories were third in the polls. The country was bitterly divided. Likewise, under New Labour, the changes to public services, to law and order, the redistribution of wealth, reforms like the minimum wage, they were all heavily contested at the time. And that was when the economy was strong. Meeting the challenge of these three revolutions is infinitely more difficult than any of that, and at a time when the economy is still recovering from COVID. It means reorganization of a fundamental nature in the way that government works, bringing in the brightest and best innovators from outside government, and a mobilization of talent and resource we're nowhere near achieving. And I don't think it can be done unless politicians work across traditional party lines to create a plan that is sustainable over at least a decade. Because reforms as far-reaching and difficult as these require consistency of policy over time, even through a change of government. So, my institute, over these next months, will set out in a series of papers and seminars with a global as well as national perspective, at least the principles of this new policy agenda. Then the Britain Project, it's a group working across party lines, though headed by a Liberal Democrat, Monica Harding. It will organize a conference in May. And we want this conference to be an opportunity for people to come together and set out a broad direction for the future of Britain. Those participating should leave politics and ideology at the door. Our task is practical understanding of how the world is changing and what that means for what works to make our country stronger, fairer, and more prosperous. The choices will be hard. Old ways, old interests, old thinking don't go gently. But neither should a country, especially one with such a proud history as ours, slip gently into a lower league without a strenuous effort, at least, to prevent it. Yet without a radical change in the governing of the country and its politics, this is where we're headed. And this is the debate, in my view, that Britain needs. Thank you.